To the Lakota Native American tribe and other indigenous people on North America's Great Plains, the bison was an essential part of their culture. The bison provided meat for nutrition, a hide for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, and fat for soap. The bison was also central to their religious beliefs. So when European settlers hunted the bison nearly to extinction, Lakota culture suffered. Culture is central to a society and to its continued existence. Geographers thus study culture as a way to understand similarities and differences among societies across the world, and in some cases, to help preserve these societies. All of a group's learned behaviors, actions, beliefs, and objects are a part of culture. It is a visible force that's seen in a group's actions, possessions, and influence on the landscape. For example, in a large city, you can see people working in offices, factories, and stores, and living in high-rise apartments or suburban homes. You might observe them attending movies, concerts, or sporting events. Culture can also be an invisible force that guides people through shared belief systems, customs, and traditions. All of these elements, visible and invisible, make up the cultural traits that are the building blocks of a culture. A single cultural artifact, such as an automobile, may represent many different values, beliefs, and traditions, and these interrelated traits make up a cultural complex. One generation passes its culture to the next in many ways. Children learn this in 3 basic ways. By imitation, like when a child learns language by repeating sounds. By informal instruction, as when a parent reminds a child to say the word please. By formal instruction, like when a school teaches students history. The area in which a unique culture or a specific trait develops is a cultural hearth. Classical Greece was a cultural hearth for democracy more than 2,000 years ago. New York City was a cultural hearth for rap music in the 1970s. Geographers study how cultures develop in hearths and diffuse to other places. Geographers also study taboos, which are behaviors that are heavily discouraged by a culture. Many cultures have taboos against eating certain foods, such as pork or insects. What is taboo changes over time. In the United States, marriages between Protestants and Catholics were once taboo, but they're not widely opposed now. The beliefs and practices of small, homogeneous groups of people, often living in rural areas that are relatively isolated and slow to change, are known as folk cultures. Like all cultures, they demonstrate the diverse ways that people have adapted to a physical environment. For example, people learned to make shelters out of available resources, whether it was snow or mud bricks or wood. However, people used similar resources such as wood differently. In Scandinavia, people used entire logs to build cabins. In the American Midwest, people processed trees into boards, built a frame, and then attached the boards to it. Sometimes people independently developed similar responses to similar environments. Long ago, the Mongols in Central Asia and Plains Indians in North America, both living in flat, open land with extreme weather, developed similar types of housing, portable, round shelters made of frames and animal skins. Many traits of folk culture continue today. Corn was first grown in Mexico around 10,000 years ago, and it's still grown here today. Folk cultures provide a unique sense of place and belonging. These long-established cultural hearths are very important to the inhabitants. Their shared cultural traits bring homogeneity to the culture, which gives the people a sense of place. This, in turn, also gives the inhabitants a tie to the area where they live and gives them a sense of ownership. However, because people, goods, and ideas move throughout the world, cultures spread spatially, well beyond their hearths. Prior to the mid-20th century, Kiwi were a part of the food culture of people only from China to New Zealand. Today, Kiwi have diffused throughout the world. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, improvements in transportation and communication have shortened the time required for movement, trade, or other forms of interaction between two places. This development, known as the space-time compression, has accelerated cultural change around the world. In 1817, a freight shipment from Cincinnati needed 52 days to reach New York City. By 1850, because of canals and railroads, it took half that long. And by 1852, it took only 7 days. Today, an airplane flight takes only a few hours, and digital information takes seconds or less. Similar change has occurred on the global scale. People travel freely across the world in a matter of hours, and communication has advanced to a point where people share information instantaneously across the globe. The increased interaction has had a profound impact on cultures, spreading English across the world. Globalization is the process of intensified interaction among peoples, governments, and companies of different countries around the globe. More specifically, globalization usually refers to the increased integration of the world economy since the 1970s. When cultural traits such as clothing, music, movies, types of businesses, and the built landscape spread quickly over a large area and are adopted by various groups, they become a part of the popular culture. Elements of popular culture often begin in urban areas and diffuse quickly through the media, particularly the internet. They can quickly become adopted globally. People around the world follow European soccer, Indian Bollywood movies, and Japanese animation known as anime. With people around the world wearing similar clothes, listening to similar music, and eating similar food, popular culture traits often promote uniformity in beliefs, values, and the cultural landscape across many cultures. The culture of the United States is intertwined with globalization. Through the influence of its corporations, Hollywood movies, and government, the United States exerts widespread influence in other countries. But other countries also shape American culture. For example, in 2014, the National Basketball Association included players from 30 countries or territories. Popular culture emphasizes trying what is new rather than preserving what is traditional. Many people, especially those in the older generation or who follow a folk culture, openly resist the adoption of popular cultural traits. They do this by preserving traditional languages, religions, values, and foods. While they often slow down the adoption of popular culture, they seldom are successful in keeping their traditional cultures from changing, especially among the young people of their society. One clash between popular and folk culture is occurring in Brazil. As the population expands to the interior of the rainforest, many indigenous folk cultures are having greater contact with outside groups. Remaining isolated by the forest is becoming increasingly difficult, and many young people become exposed to popular culture and are beginning to integrate into the larger Brazilian society. As the young people leave their communities, they are more likely to accept popular culture at the expense of their indigenous cultural heritage, which threatens the very existence of their folk culture. The geography of gender has become an increasingly important topic for geographers in recent decades. In folk cultures, people often have clearly defined gender-specific roles. Often, women take care of the household while men work outside the home to earn money and serve as leaders in religion and politics. In popular culture, gender-specific roles are diminishing. Women have more access to economic resources, more opportunity to work outside the home, and more chances to serve as leaders. The concept of gendered spaces or gendered landscapes clarifies the importance of cultural values on the distribution of power in societies. Throughout history and many cultures, certain behaviors have been acceptable for only one gender, and often only in certain spaces. Often, men have operated more freely than women in public spaces, while certain private spaces have been reserved for women. These differences might appear in the etiquette of visiting someone's home. The host might welcome men in the public areas on the main level, but feel comfortable only with women visiting the more private rooms on the upper level. The spread of popular culture creates tensions around the world between globalization and local diversity. Followers of traditional cultures that define gender roles strictly resent the relatively greater gender equality often portrayed in Hollywood movies. Workers in the United States resist the transfer of their jobs to overseas locations, and speakers of endangered languages struggle to preserve their language in the face of the spread of English.